A very interesting thought occurred to me this morning, which is very, very powerful. Words and definitions are very, very powerful tools because if you can define something and you can relate to it, you can relate to it. You can't relate to something that you can't define, right? So, people have difficulty understanding, let's say, maybe anxiety, but that's because they never had it. If somebody has it, they understand it. That's why Hashem tells us many times in the Torah um, that um, you should respect the convert because Gerim Hayisim B'Aretz you were basically strangers in other land, or maybe speaking about a Ger Toshav, somebody that comes to Israel to settle. He's a Gentile, but he adopts the whatever 7 Noahide laws. In other words, and that's why Jews in general have always been, if you want to call it, quite liberal, and they try to assist on minorities and oppressed people because they had a very first-hand experience of what that is. I remember Oprah; she put a lot of money and investment in trying to make this movie called Amistad, which was all about this ship of black people that came and all the sufferings, etc. But ultimately, one of the things that was interesting, she said, she was like, she wanted people to understand like what they went through, because if a person doesn't have any understanding, you can't blame somebody for not being compassionate. Let's say somebody that never felt hunger. Very famous story of a tzaddik that once came to a wealthy man's home. He wanted a donation for some people that were unfortunately poor, and he wanted them, I guess in the olden days, wood was fuel. Wanted them to make a donation to buy some wood for these people. So he goes to the wealthy man's home and he knocks on the door. The wealthy man opens the door. He says, "Yes, come in." He's got a nice fire burning. He says, "No, I need to speak to you outside." He says, "Rabbi, it's very cold outside." No, I have to speak to you outside. So he comes outside and he says, "Yeah, it's cold, right?" He says, "This is what these people are feeling," and he gives money. In other words, if a person doesn't have that feeling, that sensitivity, and that's why people often, it's very interesting, people that go through great tragedies in different diseases or different things, they suddenly, even very wealthy people, maybe now he donates $1 billion to cancer research or something like that because he personally has experienced it, he experienced the horrors, so he knows what it feels like. So it's very important to define things so we can relate to them. And once we can relate to it, then we can actually work on it and use it. So the other day we gave a class on the importance of dividing ourselves. We called it, I called the video how to bifurcate, how to split between your animal soul and your godly soul. So a person has to have a real understanding of the godly soul and a real understanding of the animal soul. It says, Yoidea nefesh tzaddik behemtoi, that a tzaddik knows his animal soul. He knows himself. If you don't really know yourself, don't really understand yourself, it's like part of awareness is very, very important in life, because a person not aware of themselves, not aware of their emotions, there's very little you can do. Change will only come in a very kind of drastic way. Nothing's going to motivate change. But a person who has awareness of self, at one time Hashem did like a little miracle for me where he kind of made me aware the heart is the seat of the emotions. It's just like one day, I don't know what happened, I just became aware. I think different people have different levels of emotional awareness. I just became aware of whatever I'm feeling. So I know if I'm feeling, God forbid, anger, if I'm happy, if I'm sad, I'm just aware of that emotion. Once you're aware of that emotion, you can decide, do I like the emotion, do I not like the emotion, do I want to change the emotion, etc., etc. So the concept that I wanted to share is this very, 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 very critical concept. And the concept is based on an idea, and the idea is like this. It says, Kol chai roises kiyumai. Every living thing wishes for its existence. It's a principle. That's why an animal doesn't want to die. Everything that is alive wishes to exist. Now, furthermore, we find that human beings will often equate their existence with a certain identity. So, for example, a person will say, okay, I am, let's say, a Jew, and therefore I will not allow anything to separate myself from being a Jew. But it works in the other way as well. A person could say, I'm a Christian. A person could say, I am whatever, I'm a professor. And then they want to fire him. He doesn't know how to handle it. Why? Because he is a professor. I remember this guy writing to Rabbi Moss, and he says, Rabbi, I'm an actor. I'm struggling. Should I give up? So the rabbi writes back to him. He says, listen, you may be acting, but you're not an actor. An actor might be a job, a profession, a desire, but that's not what you came into this world to be acting. There's a purpose in life, and what you are, what we really are, is we're servants of Hashem. That's what you are. Now, maybe you're going to serve Hashem through acting, maybe not, but I'm saying it's not a tragedy if acting doesn't become your whole career. So if a person defines himself in a certain way, then you can lose that identity, really. And this happens to many, many people. They call it, I don't know, whatever language, they call it an ego death, which is your self-perception of who you are, and something can rock that self-perception. And really what's quite interesting is that many countries, many cultures actually went through tremendous suffering, and they actually never recovered. I actually can't think of a single culture besides maybe the Jewish culture that really has this capacity to just like, kind of get up and go. Here we are, literally, what is it? The Holocaust was 1940, so we're talking about 80 years, not a lot. 80 years after a third of our people were mass murdered in the most brutal way. And now, thank God, there's a country that's the eighth most powerful country in the world. I don't know if you know that, but that's amazing. There are countries that have been around for thousands of years. Israel's the eighth most powerful country with tiny numbers. It's like a single city in America, basically. You know, and not only that, wherever the Jews went, they flourished. My own grandfather was a survivor. Thank God, he built a family. He was a multimillionaire. He did tremendous things for the Jewish people. So we're talking about this tremendous capacity to move on. And I think one of the reasons that it's very, very difficult for people to move on is because it's an ego death. Let's say the American Indians, right? So they lost whatever. I mean, the truth is, many times people, if you want to call it the Caucasian culture, makes a fundamental error in looking at a group of people, whether it's black or Arab or Indians, as one group. They're not one group. There are many, many groups. And in fact, within each other, there were many groups that would murder each other, and they had tremendous differences. So it's a very big mistake to lump them up as one group, which they're completely not. But be that as it may, there are certain groups, at least, which I'm sure had a certain pride in having land. Let's say the Apaches were warriors, right? And they were actually a very savage tribe. But be that as it may, that was their identity. And suddenly somebody comes around and has a gun, and they have bows and arrows, and suddenly, who am I, right? So there's an identity loss. But of course, there's this group, a very interesting group in Alaska, that their identity was very much connected to, they were like Eskimos, and they would build these homes underground. And this was their culture. So now what do? Because the kids are not in the mood of living in a snow house underground. So it's like their whole identity is falling apart, because, of course, if your whole identity is built on something which isn't the truest, realist identity. And a friend of mine is a very great psychiatrist and a big researcher. So he says the only real identity really is the Jewish identity, because the Jewish identity is not an identity born of power. Most identities, we were powerful. Even if you go to Ethiopia, the airport's called the Sheba. 2,000 years ago, they had a powerful queen, and they're celebrating it today. The Jewish identity is born, ironically, in humility. It's born as a nation that's chosen by God, and that choice can never be taken away. So you can listen to God, you can ignore God, but you can't take away the fact that you have an obligation, you have a choice, and you've been chosen, and you have something to do. You can't take away your fundamental raison d'etre of reality. And therefore, it's a kind of identity that all the forces of the world can come against you, and nothing is going to take it away. Because the fact is that you've been chosen by Hashem. And if something bad happens to us, I think this is also part of the reason we have this capacity to overcome, is because by the other nations, when something bad happened to them, they lost their identity. Whereas in the Jewish people, something bad happened to us, we said, oh, Shem is punishing us because we weren't good, but we're going to behave, we're going to get back to Israel. So there was a certain, if you want to call it, a psychological ability to not have this thing destroy us. And we see this very clearly in human nature, that if somebody shames somebody and that person has a ego death, it can be their end. You know what I mean? In a certain sense, people can carry that personality and that concept of their shame, and that can really affect them their whole life. Whereas if a person says, no, everything that happens to me, like Yosef, everything that happens doesn't happen to me, it happens for me. This world is run not by me. The Rebbe actually wrote to somebody, she was suffering from survivor's guilt. What's survivor's guilt? That a person feels, I should have done more. As a person who saved many people in the Holocaust, and he could never get over the fact that he didn't save more. He went to all the big tzaddikim, and nobody could help him until he came to a Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said to him, and Taka, and truly, why didn't you save more? And that like made him feel better because he realized he did what he could. He was a human being. In other words, sometimes we have these theories of aggrandization in ourselves, and this is a big problem that afflicts the West a lot. Is that we have a certain sense of power, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because the flip side is you could have like the Indian culture, which is very kind of lazy. It's like, oh, I can do nothing, like. So on one hand, you want to have a certain sense that I can do and it's up to me. But on the other hand, you have to marry that with, no, Hashem is doing it through me. It's not me doing it. And once you do that, so you don't take it personal if you didn't succeed, because it's not you that's making your success, making your failure. It's you that is trying. So the main point is this, that kol chai roitzias human. Every living thing wants its existence. Now, if you think about ourselves as multiple living things, you have a very interesting dynamic here. Why? There's a story with the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov once came to somebody, and the person was shouting at their, if you want to call it their servant, their helper. The Baal Shem Tov said, if I didn't know which house I was in, I wouldn't have known it was you, because the Shin Dalet, like the demon of anger, had surrounded you. It says when a person's angry, they lose their spirit, they lose their soul. In other words, a person is born with a certain spirit. You look at children by nature are very sensitive, very kind, very compassionate. It's the nature of a child. But one of the big, if you want to call it, negatives in this world is anger. Because when a person is angry, there are many times in Pirkei Avos it speaks about things that actually make a person lose their mind. It's a very important principle to understand, right? We know a kina, a taiva, a kavod. The person is jealous. The person that's jealous can do. I read a book called The Tyranny of Malice. It's actually a Lubavitcher psychiatrist who's about tshuva, very, very great psychiatrist. He wrote many books. And there's a whole field of psychology called Kollelian psychology. Now, Kollelian psychology is based on the idea of the problem in life is jealousy, and the way to overcome it is gratitude. And we see this very, very clearly, where people that have gratitude can't be jealous. Why? Because gratitude means whatever I received was a gift. Jealousy means whatever you have, I'm entitled to, and it's not fair that you have it and I don't. So a person can handle having more than another. They could even handle having the same amount as another, or they can handle somebody that's better than them in their estimation, like the king. If the king owns the country, I can handle it because I'm not a king. But I can't handle somebody that's equal to me having more than me. That's already not fair. Where do you see this? You have a father and a grandfather. If you have two children, just try to give one child a cupcake and the other child, I don't know, a peanut. See what happens. So now, if the father has a cupcake and he gives the children a peanut, the child will be okay. And they even have these kind of studies with monkeys, the same thing. Why? Because the child says, I'm not a parent. I'm not entitled to what the parent has. But give one kid a car. You have a car. The child doesn't go crazy. But give one kid a car and not the other, the child will go crazy, because that's not fair. And he's right, it's not fair. Why should he have? In other words, jealousy is very much a structure of human reality. Ironically, this is my own thought, so I don't know if it's valuable or not. It's just kind of my own insight. But my own insight is that jealousy is very much connected to identification. In other words, if I'm upset that you have something that I don't have, it must be that I see you as I see myself. So ironically, connected to jealousy is love, right? Because if I didn't love you, if I didn't see you similar to me, then I wouldn't have a sense of jealousy. So on a certain level, it's almost, anyway, it says that how do we overcome jealousy? So it says that the way to overcome jealousy is to understand that whatever somebody else has is a gift of Hashem. So once you see the world in this way, you don't think of the world, again, in the Western world, it's very much based on a kind of, scientific approach. So you think that things come, oh, he worked very hard, or this or that. No, things come because Hashem wanted him to have that. So they say the first of the 10 commandments is the answer to the last of the 10 commandments. The last of the 10 commandments is don't be jealous. Let's say another man's wife. Now, it's the nature of a human being to say, oh, she's a beautiful woman. Maybe I should have, whatever. But no, Hashem chose these two people that they're going to be husband and wife. You can't mess up Hashem's choice. Hashem made that choice. Now, it might have happened in a natural way, but I remember this lady that she went to a casino. She used to hang up signs. And she tells her husband, "Give me a quarter. I want to put a quarter in the casino, whatever." And he says, "Yeah, just 1 second." And a person comes and puts a quarter, and they won like millions of dollars. She says, "I was sick for months." But the question is this: could have she ever won those millions of dollars? Because the answer is no, because the world is not a casino. God runs the world. And so the point is that even though things are appearing in a random way, nothing is random. It cannot be that something that happened to you is random. It just can't be, because the world is not a random place. Now we know this mathematically. They've discovered mathematically. Everyone knows that it says that in basically the prediction of Kabbalah, in the 600th year of the sixth millennium, God will open the floodgates of wisdom above and below, and they'll converge in anticipation of Mashiach. That basically the year 1740 to 1840, that the revelation of quantum physics and science and the revelation of Chassidus, and they basically say the same thing. And they say mathematically everything is designed. It's all, every single thing that ever will happen. Every word that I'm saying to you right now was already said. There are spiritual worlds that it already happened. There's a story that the Baal Shem Tov wrote to Gershon Kitover. He came to Sfas, the Baal Shem Tov's brother-in-law moved to Eretz Yisrael. I think he came to Sfas or something. But in any event, he once wrote a letter to his brother-in-law. He said that you put somebody who was a Rav, and you put somebody in Cherem, excommunicated him. So in heaven they decided that you would die because it's a terrible thing to do. But I said that you did it because you were protecting the honor of Hashem. You didn't do it in a malicious way. They decided that a blind person is like a dead person, so therefore they were going to take away your sight for 3 months, and that's exactly what happened. And fine. So he wrote back to him, everything you said is true. The only thing is, you wrote the letter before the story happened. Now, there are many times that people wrote letters in the olden days to the Rebbe, Lubavitch Rebbe. They would write the letter, let's say, on Sunday. It would take a week to get a letter to Israel. From America, it would take a week back, but they would get the letter a week later. So it was physically impossible. So the answer is, he said that in the world above us, time happens in a different way. In the world of Yetzirah, time happens in like 30 years before our world. So, in other words, it's a crazy thing to think that in the next 30 years, every single thing that you and I will do, we already did. It already happened. Now, this is one of the things the Rebbe says, how do you have freedom of choice? It's very simple, because you don't know. So it's like if I give you two options and I know exactly what you're going to do, but you don't know. So just because you already did it doesn't mean that in your reality you didn't have freedom of choice. But in a higher reality, you chose that because either Hashem wanted you to choose that, or he wanted you to regret the choice. Because regret, charata, is a very big part of life. Tshuva is the whole greatest mitzvah. Hashem wants us to make mistakes so we can have regrets, so then we can change, because the whole point of life is change. So the point is, we were saying how that we all have a godly soul and an animal soul. So both, and it's not only that we have each part in us has a desire to exist. The animal soul wants its existence, its expansion. The godly soul wants its, and that's really what Tanya is talking about, right? What's the chapter in Tanya that speaks about the war? Is it 19? There's a war between the two souls. So ultimately, this is the job of a human being, to be able to discover himself, to know which desire is an animal desire. Sometimes, I think, I have, these days, I have a friend, he's very smart. He says, one of the problems today, it's very easy to say something you would never say to somebody and send it in a WhatsApp. You know what I mean? So a person has to think to themselves, why am I saying this? Am I saying this for the person? Am I saying it against the person? What's my motive? So a person has to think about, when they're doing, even sometimes, let's say I'm going to share a vart of Torah. Sometimes I think to myself, why am I sharing this vart? Am I sharing it because I want somebody to be inspired? I'm sharing it for my ego. What is the motive here why I'm doing this thing? And so a person has to have this kind of awareness. Now, the beautiful thing about life, and this is something that's not really spoken about in many different philosophies or whatever, religious different things, but it's the simplest and truest, most beautiful reality, which is the mechanism of growth. How do we actually grow in life? The way we grow is through expansion and contraction. And the way it works is like this. So, for example, a little child needs to learn many, many things. I read this, I don't know if it's true, that 99% of everything you'll ever know, you learned by the age of 5. Think about it. Somebody has a traumatic brain injury. They have to learn how to walk. It could take them a year. It's unbelievable. What a child learns in 2 years is unbelievable. So each thing the child has to learn how to walk. He has to learn how to talk. They taste all these different things. What is food? What isn't food? They have to learn human emotions. All these different things they have to learn. The beautiful thing about life is like a cell phone. Whenever you're looking for an app, you say, okay, I need an app, a calculator. So you go into Google Play and you take a calculator and you download it. So it takes you some time and then you might have to learn it. But once you know it, you don't have to learn it again. It's a useful tool. And therefore in life we have many useful tools. But the problem is that in life we've also picked up some very, very unuseful tools. And those are things that we have to evaluate ourselves. A very important part of life is self-reflection. So today is Rosh Chodesh Adar. The Rebbe says there are different times that you have to self-reflect. You have to self-reflect at night for the day. You have to self-reflect Friday for the week. You have to self-reflect on Rosh Chodesh for the month. And you have to self-reflect on Elul for the year. So self-reflection is very, very important. Why? Because if you don't self-reflect, you don't know the bad habits that you've picked up. And so self-reflection is very important. And once in a while, we self-reflect. We say, okay, what was my behavior? Because while you're behaving, you can't self-reflect. You're in the middle of it. But if you look back at your behavior, then you can start to say, okay, well, this is a good behavior, because the goal is not to be hard on yourself. The goal is to be the best self you can be. But you have to know yourself to know which part is the best and which part is not the best. And so therefore it's very important in life to be very, very conscious of both your qualities and your deficiencies, because you're here in this world to give your qualities to the world, but you're also here to reduce your deficiencies. And a human being can't be a person that doesn't have both. There's not a single human being in this world that doesn't have tremendous qualities and tremendous deficiencies. And the two counteract each other. So in simple words, we have to become self-aware. We're on Rosh Chodesh. We have to take a chata to look at our behavior this month and say, okay, well, this behavior was good, and I want to do more of that. And that behavior wasn't good, and I want to do less of that. Now think about our lives. Our lives are so beautiful because we get to self-reflect every night. We get to grow every single day. Every year we're getting higher. We're this infinite spirit of Shem that's continuously expanding and contracting and continuously growing all the time. Our light is getting bigger and bigger and better and better all the time. And this is a time of Mashiach where each person gets more in tune with themselves, and in their inner consciousness, their inner awareness of their own emotional selves, they're able to start to say, okay, that's a good emotion, that's a bad emotion. And this is the most amazing Messianic world, which has already come to a large extent because people are much deeper now. I think, I have a friend, unfortunately passed away. He had a good lie, Norman Frank. He said, why was man put into the Garden of Eden? Because in order to be a person that can think, you have to be in the Garden of Eden. When a person is too stressed, people, let's say, are starving in Africa, you don't have time to self-reflect. So we're so lucky that many, many people in the world, not all, we have to help everyone, but many people in the world have this emotional, psychological space to self-reflect. So we have to do this. And this is our avodah, this is our mission in life, to look at ourselves and to grow. Anyway, l'chaim v'levracha.